President Yoon's sales diplomacy in full swing in Washington, D.C., securing an additional $1.9 billion investment, this time in the high-tech sector, paving the way for expanding the bilateral alliance in technology. All that building upon the 70 years of the security alliance, and Presidents Yoon and Biden paid their respects at the Korean War Veterans Memorial. U.S. President Joe Biden declares his re-election bid for 2024 with a rematch with Trump likely. Good afternoon. We start in Washington, D.C., where President Yoon continues with his salesman diplomacy. The president has secured almost $6 billion in investment. This as Seoul and Washington seek to take their 70 years of security alliance to the next level. Our presidential office correspondent Oh Soo-young reports.
A total of $5.9 billion is how much President Yoon has reached in investment pledges so far during his official state visit to Washington, D.C. On the second day of his trip, the self-professed #1 salesman of Korea on Tuesday attended an investment declaration event where 6 high-tech American firms committed a total of $1.9 billion into South Korea, where they will build production facilities. President Yoon thanked the CEOs of each company, saying chipmakers onsemi and Green Tree's pledges will contribute to economic security by strengthening the semiconductor industry supply chain. He added that Air Products and Plug Power's investment in clean hydrogen, as well as Pure Cycle Technology and EMP Belstar, will play a major role in the transition to eco-friendly energy and industrial structures. Material science company Corning Incorporated also made a pledge of $1.5 billion. To attract further investments, the South Korean leader vowed to make efforts to create the world's best investment environment by improving regulations to meet global standards and providing clear incentives to firms that contribute to the stabilization of high-tech industries and supply chains. This comes as President Yoon pushes to broaden the scope of Seoul and Washington's 70-year-old military alliance.
다양한 이유에 의한 경기 둔화 등 투자 환경이 쉽지 않고 또 기술 경쟁, 에너지, 기후 위기에 따라 여러 가지 불확실성이 날로 증가하고 있습니다. 저는 이 복합 위기를 우리가 함께 극복하기 위해서는 한미 동맹이 새로운 단계의 동맹으로 도약해야 된다고 생각합니다. 군사 안보 동맹으로 시작한 양국 관계를 공급망, 첨단 과학기술 동맹으로 발전시켜 양국이 함께 성장하고 행동하는 동맹으로 만들어야 합니다.
Yoon on Tuesday also held a business roundtable event which included 30 leaders from some of South Korea and America's largest tech firms. Among those attending from South Korea were the heads of Samsung, LG, Hyundai, Lotte and SK Hynix. From the US side were Qualcomm, Microsoft and Google, along with General Motors, Tesla, Boeing, Lockheed Martin and Moderna. Yoon on Monday met the CEO of Netflix, who committed $2.5 billion of investment into Korean content over a 4-year period. President Yoon is traveling with his largest ever business delegation of some 122 corporate leaders. With his focus on emerging tech sectors, Yoon is expected to attend more industry-related events this week, including a video content forum here in Washington, D.C., and an industrial cluster roundtable in Boston. Oh Soo-young, Arirang News, Washington, D.C.
President Yoon believes that South Korea and the U.S. are the perfect partners moving forward in their tech alliance, which will mutually benefit the two nations. Our Choi Min-jung tells us more.
South Korean President Yoon during Tuesday's business roundtable in Washington expressed hopes of creating economic synergies that will benefit both South Korea and the U.S. He said this would be possible by combining core technologies from the two countries.
이번 미국 방문을 계기로 양국이 명실상부한 첨단 기술 동맹임을 재확인하고 기업인들께서도 새롭고 혁신적인 비즈니스 기회를 창출할 수 있기를 기대합니다.
Yoon noted that South Korea and the U.S. entered into an economic alliance in 2012 after signing a bilateral FTA. And over the span of 11 years, the bilateral trade volume has grown by 90%. He underlined that the U.S. is now South Korea's second largest trading partner, while South Korea is the state's sixth largest. This highlights how the Seoul-Washington alliance has gone beyond just a security alliance and has developed into one that mutually benefits both economies. Following the business roundtable, Seoul's senior presidential secretary for economic affairs said South Korea and the U.S. have now established an inseparable relationship.
The scale of investment is also important, but as the president said, the two countries require each other in almost all areas of high-tech supply chains and industry.
He added that the business forum was very meaningful in celebration of the 70 years of the Seoul-Washington alliance, as it was filled with passion for cooperation. Choi Min-dong, Arirang News.
And beyond the security and advanced technology, South Korea and the U.S. are gearing up to open up yet another area of alliance, space, which President Yoon says will be at the center of the two nations' relations over the next 70 years. Our Lee Dae-yeon has more.
Space ties between South Korea and the U.S. reach a milestone. President Yoon on Tuesday visited NASA's Goddard Space Flight Center in Greenbelt, Maryland with U.S. Vice President Kamala Harris. During his visit, President Yoon highlighted the importance of the joint statement of intent for cooperation on space exploration and science, which was signed by South Korea's Minister of Science and ICT Lee Jong-ho and NASA Deputy Administrator Pam Melroy on the same day.
오늘 체결하는 대한민국 과학기술정보통신부와 미국 나사 간의 공동성명서는 그간 양국의 우주 협력이 명실상부한 우주 동맹으로 한 단계 도약하는 계기가 될 것입니다.
He also said that he hoped developments in the field of space between the two countries would contribute to the world while setting up fair and rational principles in terms of utilizing outer space. Yoon also mentioned NASA's accomplishments, adding that studying space will result in solutions to current global issues such as climate change. He said that South Korea is working on establishing a National Aeronautics Administration or a Korean version of NASA in order to lead the country's space economy. He also expected more space cooperation between Korea's National Aeronautics Administration and NASA.
카사와 나사 간 공동 연구 개발 프로그램을 발굴해서 착수하고 협력 파트너로서 인력 교류, 정보, 지식 교류를 활발히 할 수 있도록 커뮤니케이션 플랫폼을 구축할 수 있기 바랍니다. 카사 설립에도 나사의 적극적인 조언과 직접적인 인력 교류가 있기를 희망합니다.
Meanwhile, in joint remarks, U.S. Vice President Kamala Harris said the two countries renewed their commitment to strengthening cooperation in the next frontier of expanding the bilateral space alliance. She welcomed South Korea for joining a current space exploration mission and further cooperation in the Artemis program to return astronauts to the moon. She also described the 70-year alliance between the two countries as the linchpin of security in the Indo-Pacific. Lee Dae-yeon, Arirang News.
All the new partnerships are built upon 7 years of ironclad alliance that dates to the end of the Korean War. And President Yoon took time to make sure that those who served do not go unnoticed. Our Kim Do-yeon has this report.
As President Yoon started his first full day in Washington, D.C. on Tuesday, he started by paying his respects at Arlington National Cemetery. Greeted by members of the U.S. military, President Yoon laid a wreath at the tomb of the unknown soldier and delivered a plaque that read, "We will never forget, forgotten no more," a reference to the Korean War being called the Forgotten War as World War II and Vietnam overshadowed the war on the Korean Peninsula in 1950. While visiting presidents have paid their respects at Arlington National Cemetery before, President Yoon's visit comes as the two countries celebrate the 70th anniversary of their alliance. Some of the 215,000 U.S. veterans buried behind me served or died during the Korean War, including 27 Medal of Honor recipients. Efforts to highlight the milestone of the alliance were made during lunch, as well as President Yoon hosted a 70th anniversary celebration lunch with around 360 people from the two countries. And while giving out the highest recognition of military merit, Yoon said the service of veterans in the Korean War was not in vain.
한국전 참전 용사들의 희생이 없었다면 오늘날 대한민국은 없었을 것입니다. 한국전쟁은 잊혀진 전쟁이 아니라 승리한 전쟁이고 기억해야 할 전쟁입니다. 여러분들이 바로 대한민국의 오늘을 있게 한 영웅이자 진정한 우리들의 친구입니다.
He also emphasized that U.S. soldiers made sacrifices for a country that they had never heard of before with only the idea of protecting freedom, adding that South Korea will now do its part.
존경하는 내외 귀빈 여러분, 이제 대한민국은 국제사회의 책임 있는 일원으로서 자유, 인권, 법치 등 보편적 가치를 공유하고 있는 국가들과 연대해서 세계 시민의 자유 수호 확대와 국제사회의 평화와 번영을 위해 그 책임과 역할을 다할 것입니다.
Meanwhile, President Yoon promised that South Korea will make every effort to recover bodies from the Korean War that have yet to be returned to their families, saying the country will work until the very last is returned home. Kim Do-yeon, Arirang News, Washington, D.C.
In a solemn gesture of respect, Presidents Yoon and Biden visited the Korean War Veterans Memorial in Washington, D.C. on Tuesday local time. The two leaders later read and bowed their heads to pay tribute to the brave men who lost their lives during the Korean War. First Ladies Kim Gun-hee and Jill Biden were also present, standing closely by as the presidents honored the fallen heroes. During their visit, the leaders took a moment to stop by the Wall of Remembrance, which bears the names of the 43,000 Korean and American troops who sacrificed their lives during the war. Ahead of the summit with U.S. President Joe Biden, South Korea's President Yoon said recent U.S. military document leaks will not affect the strong Seoul-Washington relations. President Yoon, who is currently in the U.S. on a state visit, told NBC News on Monday local time that the issue will not shake the ironclad trust that supports the alliance between the two countries, as it is based on shared values like freedom. On supporting Ukraine, he says South Korea's decision to rule out the possibility of providing lethal aid to Ukraine could change in the event of a large-scale civilian attack, and said the country is closely monitoring the situation. He also added that he was not under pressure from the White House to step up the provision of aid. The White House has thanked President Yoon for his leadership in improving South Korea's relations with Japan amid efforts to bolster trilateral cooperation on regional security and economic challenges. National Security Council spokesperson John Kirby, speaking to South Korean reporters on Tuesday, noted that Yoon's diplomatic outreach to Japan aligns with U.S. President Joe Biden's desire to bolster trilateral ties, and that the two East Asian neighbors mending fences is a good thing for the region and the world. Ahead of Yoon and Biden's Wednesday summit, Kirby said Washington is looking forward to broadening and deepening the bilateral alliance, calling South Korea a force for good in the world. Regarding discussions on Ukraine and Taiwan, the official said the U.S. won't be pushing Seoul to do more for Washington, but instead talking about how the allies can work together for peace and security. Just one day ahead of the South Korea-U.S. summit, U.S. President Joe Biden formally declared his re-election bid for 2024, which is poised to see a rematch between Biden and Trump. Our Yoon reports.
On Tuesday, U.S. President Joe Biden was greeted with chants of "Let's Go Joe" from a crowd of building trades union members, a key base of Democratic support following his announcement to run for re-election in 2024. Biden highlighted that things are being turned around, that changes are being made, and that it is time to finish the job.
Now we've just got to keep it going. Finish the job. We just remember who we are. We are the United States of America. There's nothing beyond our capacity. Nothing. If we work together.
This was during his first public appearance since confirming he's looking to stay in the White House in a 3-minute video where he promised to heal the soul of the nation. He also said the question the nation is facing is whether there's more or less freedom and more or fewer rights in the years ahead. President Biden described Republican platforms as a threat to American freedom, calling them MAGA extremists, referring to MAGA, or Make America Great Again, a slogan that has become synonymous with Donald Trump supporters. At age 80, President Biden is the oldest-serving president and now needs to overcome Americans' concerns about his age in order to win re-election. But this is also the case for Donald Trump, aged 76, who Biden will face off against in the November 2024 election if he wins the Republican primary race. And challenging President Biden within the Democratic Party for the presidential nomination is Robert F. Kennedy Jr., the son of former Senator Robert F. Kennedy and nephew of former President John F. Kennedy, seen as royalty in Democratic politics. Vice President Kamala Harris will once again be Biden's running mate. Yoons, Arirang News.
A welcoming ceremony will take place when President Yoon arrives at the White House for his planned summit with President Biden. And there will be a special group performing there with the traditional Korean song Arirang. Our Song Yujin has their story.
Day 3 of President Yoon's state visit to the U.S. will begin with an arrival ceremony at the White House. There, he'll be greeted by a special group of cultural envoys, the New Jersey Children's Choir. The choir is made up of students from the Korean School of New Jersey, a weekend school that offers Korean culture and language classes for Korean Americans. Ahead of their White House performance, Arirang News had the chance to speak with Principal Hwang Hyun-ju, the choir's director.
When we first created this choir in 2014, we did it to teach our students Korean culture so that they could promote Korean culture to their audience in the future.
The children are no strangers to singing on big stages like at the U.S. Capitol and the United Nations. After seeing their videos on YouTube, the White House offered them the chance to perform. And their performance on Wednesday will be one for the books as it offers these performers a rare opportunity to take to the stage at the White House. Their set list, the Korean folk song Arirang, and Tomorrow from the Broadway musical Annie.
Arirang represents the unity of Koreans as it's a song that every Korean knows, and Tomorrow is one of the songs we've sung in the past. It symbolizes hope for the future, so we picked the song hoping that our two countries can become even better friends tomorrow.
Principal Hwang hopes Wednesday's performance will serve as a cultural bridge for all.
It's really meaningful that these children are performing in front of the presidents of their parents' home country and their own country's president. I want the children to feel proud of their heritage and show those in Korea how well they're doing overseas.
Upon hearing the news, the choir has plugged in extra rehearsals on top of their regular Saturday practice sessions. All that's left now is for their harmonious voices to ring out across the White House while wearing the Korean traditional hanbok. Song Yujin, Arirang News.
Much attention is also on what will be served at the state dinner, and it's known that the dishes will present a harmony of flavors and cultures from both countries. Our Lee Soo-jin reports.
South Korean President Yoon and his wife, First Lady Kim Gun-hee, will sit down to a state dinner hosted by U.S. President Joe Biden at the White House on Wednesday local time. The state dinner pays tribute to the cultures of both countries through place settings, decorations, and even the menu.
as we welcome President Yoon and Mrs. Kim, honoring the 70 years of our alliance with symbols and moments of beauty that reflect both our countries.
The table decor will have a color scheme reflecting the South Korean national flag, while the 6-foot-tall centerpieces of cherry trees are reminiscent of both the streets of Jeju and Washington's tidal basin in springtime. The Bidens also invited Korean-American guest chef and TV personality Edward Lee to prepare the dinner alongside the White House chefs, a measure of culinary diplomacy by the U.S. first couple. The first course will include Maryland crab cake served with a dish dressed in gochujang, a spicy sweet Korean fermented paste, to honor the food of both countries. The main course of Kirby, or beef short ribs, featuring butter bean grits, carrots, and pine nuts, is also a marriage of food from South Korea and the U.S. And it will be banana split for dessert, a dish that Jill Biden affectionately said was her husband's favorite during a preview of the state dinner. That will be topped with a caramel sauce infused with Korean fermented bean paste, doenjang. 이수진, Arirang News.
South Korea's natural population continues to fall as the country records fresh lows for the number of births for the month of February. Our Moon and Yeon has the details.
South Korea's birth rate was at its lowest for the month of February since data was first compiled in the early 1980s. According to a report released by Statistics Korea on Wednesday, the number of births tumbled to 19,939, which is a 3.7% decline compared to February last year. Meanwhile, the number of deaths reached some 27,000, a 6.5% decrease on year. This brought the natural change calculated by subtracting the number of deaths from the number of births to a decline of over 7,000. While that's a smaller decline than in January, when the natural population fell by 9,000, South Korea's population has been seeing a natural decline for nearly 4 years in a row. However, things may be looking up with the rising number of marriages following the end of COVID-19 restrictions enabling people to hold a wedding and move in together. There were 17,846 registered marriages in February this year, which is nearly a 17% rise compared to the same month last year. Similarly, the number of divorces also rose on year, albeit showing a smaller rise than the number of marriages. There were 7,228 divorce applications filed in February, a 1.3% rise on year, but a 0.3% decrease on month. 문혜련, Arirang News.
Consumers in South Korea expect prices to come down for the second consecutive month. According to Bank of Korea on Wednesday, South Korean consumers in April said they expect to see an inflation rate of 3.7% over the next year. This is the lowest figure given by consumers in 11 months. One BOK official says this is due to a huge drop in petroleum prices and a slowdown in price increases for processed food. The composite consumer sentiment index, meanwhile, was up 3.1 points on month to 95.1, the highest in 10 months, as inflation has slowed down in recent months. South Korean semiconductor company SK Hynix saw a $2.5 billion loss in its first quarter, the largest since its incorporation into SK Group in 2012. SK Hynix announced on Wednesday that according to its early calculations, the company recorded an operating loss of 3.4,230 million Korean won, or around $2.5 billion. It is the second quarter in a row that it has seen a loss. The company cited decreasing demand and a fall in chip prices as a reason for the record high deficit, but also said that it expects the market environment to improve in the second half of the year. In central Seoul, right in front of the Gyeongbokgung Palace Gate, with streams of people and cars passing, was once the site where the king and the people met during the Joseon dynasty. After the area was severely damaged during the Japanese colonial rule, it is now looking to be restored again. Our Choi Soo-hyung reports.
Woldae is a wide, square-shaped traditional podium that has no roof and is usually found in front of an important building like a royal audience hall or the big gates to a palace. It means a podium to look at the moon. South Korea's Cultural Heritage Administration is currently restoring the Woldae to Gyeongbokgung Palace, with work having started in September last year. Woldae was used for royals, nobles, and high-ranking officials to stand on to participate in large royal events. The Gwanghwamun Woldae was built during the Joseon dynasty's King Gojong era to make its dynasty even greater under Japanese occupation.
Woldae is a raised podium that serves to elevate the level of Gwanghwamun, highlighting its dignity.
The Cultural Heritage Administration began excavating the Gwanghwamun Square area last September for the first time in 57 years, carrying out restoration work by referring to photographs and materials that had been handed down since the 1890s.
We were able to confirm what had been there before, and there were no problems in restoring Woldae because there are clear photos and records that we can use as historical data.
As the work began, railroad tracks from the Japanese occupation of Korea were discovered. Woldae had been destroyed in order to build the tracks. However, the administration found stones that indicate the overall size of Woldae, which was an important clue in restoring the original shape. This makes the restoration process much smoother. The scale will be 48.7 meters from north to south and 29.7 meters from east to west. The low stairs that lead up to the podium will also be restored, and the King's Path that crosses the center of the podium from north to south will also be remade. Cultural heritage restoration experts will work together to ensure that the restoration process is more authentic and accurate. Choi Soo-hyung, Arirang News.
Good afternoon. Those of us in central parts of the country need to keep a small umbrella handy with light passing rain in the forecast throughout the day. Highs are rising today but still hovering below norms in most regions. Southern provinces are having brighter skies with normal to good air quality nationwide. A light wind may make it feel chilly today, so do dress accordingly. Lots of people are coming down with colds due to the up and down temperatures. And do expect to have that trend through the end of April. But at least temperatures will return to normal tomorrow afternoon with sunnier skies in central areas. In Washington, D.C., where the South Korea-U.S. summit will be held, morning clouds will give way to afternoon showers with refreshing temperatures on Wednesday. With that in mind, here's a look at the international weather conditions.
Thank you so much for watching. Have a great rest of the day.